So good evening again. My name is Val Walters. I'm the Executive Director of the Ryan Bartell Foundation. We're a youth suicide prevention nonprofit in Loudoun County, and in some cases beyond. Tonight's parent panel is one that we've done before. We do parent panels once a month as a way to share resources with families on specific topics that relate to parenting teens. We know that substance use is related to suicidality and self-harm. And today we're going to hear a little bit more about that from Fiona Brown, who's with LCPS, and Todd Wills with Loudoun County Mental Health. And our moderator for this evening is Denisha Hamilton, a board member and chairs our Mental Health Advisory Board. So without really further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Denisha and we'll get started.
Thank you, Val. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. If you've tuned into any of our parent panels, you probably see my face every month. So welcome back. So I am a licensed clinical social worker and a mental health therapist. I own a group practice here in Loudoun County called Journey to Wellness. And as Val mentioned, I sit on the board of directors for the Ryan Bartell Foundation. I think this is a very important topic for us, and I'm really appreciative of everyone logging in tonight. I work predominantly with teens and young adults, and the normalization of drinking and substance abuse in general is something that I think most parents, if not all, are really concerned about. So we hope to provide some really awesome information for you tonight. I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So I'll start with you, Fiona.
Thanks, Denisha. I'm Fiona Brown. I am a licensed professional counselor in Virginia. I do work as a student assistant specialist in LCPS. And prior to doing that, I worked in teen substance use treatment and prevention for just over 10 years before coming into the school system. So I really spend all my time working with teens and specializing in teen substance use and treatment and prevention. And I recently wrote a book called Read This and Call Me in the Morning. It's a prevention guide for parents on understanding, preventing, responding to teen substance use. So I'm excited to be here today to talk to you all about this. This is my favorite thing to talk about. I get really excited, and so I'll try to keep myself calm during our talk today. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. Okay, Todd.
Hi, first of all, I just want to thank the Ryan Bartell Foundation for inviting me and reaching out to our agency. Glad to be here. I'm Todd Wills. I'm the Behavioral Health Outpatient Program Manager for Loudoun County Mental Health, Substance Abuse and Developmental Services. I oversee a program that provides outpatient services for children, adolescents, and adults with mental health, substance abuse, and developmental disorders. I've have extensive experience with adolescents in various different modalities as far as in residential programs, group home settings, and outpatient services. And I am a licensed professional counselor, been a licensed professional counselor for about 22 years now. And I provide supervision to other staff to help them pursue licensure as well. And I have, let me see here, about 30 years of experience overall in mental health and substance abuse services, specializing with teens and adults with co-occurring disorders. So again, happy to be here and look forward to tonight's panel.
Awesome. So I'm going to start us off by reading a quick statistic for all of us. So mental health and substance use affect people of all ages and walks of life. Children and teens are at the highest risk of developing problematic substance use. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and this topic is especially important because not only are our kids already at high risk because of their still developing brain, teens facing mental health challenges are at an even greater risk of developing problematic substance use. Approximately 50% of people with a mental health disorder have a co-occurring substance use disorder. The relationship between mental health and substance use is complex. To explore how these things affect one another, our panel of experts are here to talk more about this and answer your questions. So the first question I'm going to throw out for you guys is, why do teens use drugs? Todd, since I made Fiona start last time.
Sure. Well, teens use substances for a lot of different reasons. One is acceptance. people want to fit in and belong. That's a big thing with teens, identifying with their peer group. Also, the fact that there's an appeal to it. I mean, the social media, TV, in movies, the way that substance use is portrayed, specifically alcohol, nicotine use, there's an appeal to it. There's also, it's a short-term solution. So if a person has a mental health, is feeling depression, anxiety, has difficulty kind of like regulating their emotions or slowing their thought process down, it's a short-term solution that can be utilized. Rebellion, sometimes kids just want to rebel against the system, society, and their parents. And curiosity, kids are young and they don't have a lot of life experience and they want to see what's out there. And so, they hear things from their friends or other people. And so they're interested. They want to experience, because of curiosity. And then also, as you touched upon before, if a person has, depression, substance or depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, or, attention deficit disorder, they're, trying to alleviate some of those symptoms. And so that could be all reasons why kids could turn to using substances.
Yeah, and we talk to teens about how there are a variety of different reasons why someone might start using. It can be, like Todd said, it could be as simple as being curious, hearing that it's fun, thinking that it'll be kind of, an escape, a temporary way for them to just kind of feel different, or maybe cope with being anxious in a crowd, going to a party and not really being sure what else to do with themselves, or feeling like that's sort of what's expected of them at that age and time in their life. So there are all kinds of different reasons, and they can be very simple, straightforward reasons that young people start using. But the reasons why it gets really out of hand, which is something we really want to talk more about today, can be totally different to why they might have started using in the first place. So it's important for us to acknowledge what some of those reasons are that teens might start using, while also being cognizant of what some of those things are that might lead to this getting out of hand when they hadn't really intended for that to happen.
I definitely see a lot of self-medicating with teens that are really trying to understand depression and anxiety, and, like you said, attention deficit or any other mental health issue. They don't always know how to handle that or talk to their parents or teachers or school officials. And so being able to just numb yourself through things, and then what starts as, usually pretty innocent, quickly can turn into a problem. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what are some of the substances that you guys are seeing teens use, and what should we as parents be on the lookout for?
All right, Todd, I'm going for this one.
All you.
Fiona.
This is such a big question, really, and I definitely am going to need some help with it, I'm sure, but because you would see a different culture of use depending on what region you're in, depending on even what school district you're in, or what school within a school district you're in. There really is so much impact based on what's available in that community, based on what's really prevalent. And so we do see differences in different places that people go. In some communities, alcohol use is more prevalent for teens. In other communities, marijuana is more prevalent. What we are seeing overall kind of nationwide is that marijuana really has become kind of the most prominent drug of abuse, right there alongside nicotine as well. So those two would be, in my opinion, kind of our biggest concerns, not only because teens see those things as very kind of, benign because of, as Todd was saying before, there's a lot of promotion of these things in media. There's been a lot done to really market these as kind of quote unquote healthy or safe. And so teens really get drawn into those messages that they receive. So for me, nicotine and marijuana are really our biggest concerns right now. But we do have other things that young people are using, like prescription medicines, and especially them getting a hold of fake prescription pills and the risk for fentanyl. being in those fake products. So we are, I think certainly the most pressing for me is addressing, those really prominent substances of abuse that teens find to be really, kind of safe, which are not safe at all for them. And then things like fentanyl, which have been in the news, and now there's more coming out about xylazine, and we're seeing teens using, what are called dietary supplements, which are unregulated substances that really we're still learning more about and how they affect people. So I'm going to stop there and see what Todd wants to add to that.
And agree with you as far as what we're seeing in Loudoun County, as far as in our agency, is definitely, I agree with Fiona, as far as the cannabis. We also see alcohol abuse. We're definitely seeing an increase in prescription medication, benzodiazepines, and things of that nature. Also like opioids, and as Fiona was mentioning, fentanyl, which is very concerning because of the prevalence and potential for overdose and death. So that's very concerning. But that's what we're seeing. I did a little bit of research, kind of looking over, kind of what's prevalent out there as far as in monitoring the future survey that's done through the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and it's pretty similar. It's like nicotine vaping is like 27% of seniors have used, cannabis is 30%, and alcohol is 51%. So that's that, and what that is just kind of gives you kind of an overview of the population and based on the survey. But when you look at like just trying the substances, it goes up. So it's like 60% of high school seniors have reported trying alcohol, 40% tobacco, and 50% for cannabis. So it overall, as as we see, is that there's just a trend of nicotine, cannabis, and alcohol abuse is very prevalent. And as we were saying before, these also tend to be the three substances that are legal, easily accessible. But what's important to remember is legal does not mean safe.
And kind of to piggyback on that as well, something that I think we're, hopefully people are learning more about is that talking about these substances is really, not the same talking about it today as talking about it in the late 90s. Even the potency of THC products today is so much higher than it was even in the late 90s. It's gone up from, smoked products being 3 to 4% THC to now we're seeing them in 16 to 22% THC, really high rates, even in those smoked kind of traditional products. And then in what kids call carts, THC vaping devices, we're seeing, 90% and upwards THC in those devices. So they're getting really high doses of this chemical, even though we might think, oh, people were using alcohol, people were using nicotine, people were using marijuana when we were younger, and during our generation. But this is so much different than it was. The nicotine content is higher in vaping devices than it is in cigarettes. And certainly when we talk about things like fentanyl and prescription medicines, these are really potent things that kids are using. So the risk goes up, and the rate of addiction is increasing as well because they're using such potent products. So for me, that's another concern.
So I'm glad you clarified the vaping, because I think we have these conversations almost daily with teens, but carts and dabs and what's in a vape, I think that's really important for us to clarify. So correct me if I'm wrong, but when we are talking about nicotine, we're talking about vapes, not like cigarettes, correct?
Kids still use cigarettes. I mean, so I think we can, you can definitely focus on vaping, but the reality of it is that they're all devices used to basically put nicotine into the body, which is highly addictive. And so whether it's vaping and cartridge is heated up to release the vapor, or you're smoking a cigarette, it's still nicotine going to the brain. It's highly addictive. So but yeah, however we want to discuss it is fine.
And teen use of tobacco products and cigarettes in particular has gone up since vaping has become so popular. So really what these products are doing is actually kind of driving kids back to cigarette use because of that addiction to nicotine and that kind of, focus on getting the nicotine in whatever way they need to.
I also have a lot of clients that talk about edibles. So can we talk about that for a couple minutes and how other ways that our students are using marijuana other than just smoking?
Yeah, I talk a lot about edibles when I give presentations to young people because these are products that really are marketed and designed for kids. They're put into packaging that looks just like Sour Patch Kids or is even called that. These companies are not really concerned about copyright infringement. And so you'll see like a package of what looks like it's Nerd's Rope. And really it's a gummy product that has THC in it. And so we talk about the marketing that's really intentionally aimed at them. And these are high concentration THC products. So edibles are a way that people can get a high concentration of THC without having to, smoke or do something like that. And it's really even less detectable because you don't have that strong smell that people associate with smoked THC products. And so it's much easier to conceal. And again, who needs to conceal it? Children do. Who needs it to be in a packaging that makes it really hard to decipher whether it's drug related or not? Young people do. So we talk a lot about that really targeted marketing, which I encourage parents to talk about with their kids as well.
And that was going to be my next question, Fiona. So thank you for opening that door. So we know that these risks exist. How and when do we talk to our kids about this? Does it start in late elementary school, in middle school? So that question is kind of twofold. When do we have these conversations, and then how, without pushing our kids away or putting up their defenses or them just blowing us off as parents, being concerned for no reason?
I mean, Fiona, if you want to start, I can add, because I know that's your wheelhouse.
Yes, I'm very enthusiastic about this particular topic. I really think that there is no such thing as too early to talk to your kids about it. Now, the trickier part is making that messaging age appropriate, right? So we're not going to talk about how people, shoot heroin when we're talking to our 6-year-old. But if you're walking down the street, I like to talk about, teachable moments for our younger kids. You're walking down the street and somebody is vaping. My kids will ask me about those things, even before they knew what I did for a living. When they were little, they would ask me like, what is that? Why is Uncle so-and-so using that? Why are they smoking? Like, isn't that bad for you? And those are like these little kind of windows of opportunity to just get a little bit of information in. You don't have to give a TED talk on everything that is involved in substance use, but you can give little kind of pieces of information. And it's kind of like, sneaking in and giving them some information, sneaking back out before they even realize you've done it, kind of using those teachable moments to give them a little bit of that kind of critical thinking around substance use and addiction, right? Regardless of what drug we're talking about, the addictive process is the same. And the way that these things affect our brain are predictable. So those kinds of themes are really valuable to talk to even really young kids about. Just kind of managing what's age appropriate to share in terms of how specific you get.
The other thing is that also, if you do suspect that you're, again, there's the education about the negative, effects of drugs on the, physical, psychological effects. But it is one of those things that if you do suspect that your child is using or whatever, it's like you definitely want to intervene. Like, so when you say when's the time to talk to them, it's like you want to talk to them early. If you have this idea that your son or daughter is using, you want to have that conversation early. You want to talk with them about, the negative consequences. You want to talk to them about how you you want to keep them safe and you care about them and you don't want to see this pattern continue. Because in my experience, as a professional and then also, supervising people, parents will say, I thought this was just going to go away. I thought this was just going to be a phase. They used a couple times. I kind of, had a little talk with them, and then I just kind of, I just thought it was going to go away. And then now they're coming into, our program. They're involved. They may be involved with the legal system, and there was opportunities to intervene. So I think it's just important to make sure that if you suspect something, you have that conversation, and you address it.
I agree, absolutely. And, if you're having early conversations, even before you recognize any signs of a problem, and those conversations are very open and empathic and kind of health focused, this is ultimately a brain health issue. It's not a moral issue. It's really only a legal issue because people decide for it to be a legal issue. That part is sort of decided by politicians, right? But the health part of this and the brain health specifically related to this is something that is inevitable and is something that we all need to be aware of. And so if we have those really health-driven, empathic conversations with our kids early on, then when something does come up, it's easier to have that more difficult conversation and kind of more frank intervention, if you've already been laying that groundwork of having early conversations.
One thing that I say at probably every parent panel that I participate on is also, as adults, making sure that we watch our reactions when we're having these conversations with our kids. So I really like, Fiona, how you mentioned being open and empathic, because sometimes our own fear creates this wall where your kid may just be curious and wanting to have that conversation and wanting to be educated, and the way we respond, it closes the door. So now they're not talking to us about their concerns. They're going to their friends that are just as uneducated as them, and that's not what we want. And so talking about those curiosities and talking about, like, why is that appealing? Because I'm a big believer in just putting the truth out there. The reality is, if your kid goes to high school, they are interacting with people that are under the influence. If your kid is in middle school, they are interacting with people that are under the influence. If we send them to a party, it's on TV, it's everywhere. So let's just have honest conversations rather than, it's not going to happen to my kid or at my house. Have the conversation, find out what's going on for them. And then, like Fiona and Todd both said, it's giving that information. I like to think of it as sort of like a bee sting. You pop in, you give the information, and you pop out. If you're having a 45-minute conversation, your kid checked out at minute 3. So you want to get the information in. Find resources. And we'll talk more about resources at the end of this, but really, if you don't feel comfortable, then thinking about who in your circle might be a better person to have those conversations, or how do you educate yourself, or go on that journey with your child about educating yourself about the dangers of substance use. So if we think our child is using a substance, I feel like a lot of times we might want to immediately jump to treatment or talking to schools, things like that. What should we do? What is the right way to handle those concerns?
I think the first thing is, again, you got to have a conversation. You're I really like what Fiona and Denisha, you just reinforced as far as like being open and empathetic. It's almost like you're trying to find out what is the right intervention for the situation. So you want to get as much information and them to disclose what's been going on. You may have some ideas, but you really just want to be very inquisitive and be like, tell me more, like what's going on, and come with that kind of open-mindedness. Because like you said, if they shut down, then you don't have the information you need. So depending on how long it's been going on with, you can look at, what needs to be a consequence, because you want to get their attention that this isn't an appropriate Your family doesn't condone them using substances. Your family is not on board with them, using drugs or drinking and coming home intoxicated or under the influence. So you need to have some kind of intervention, as far as it could be a consequence. Like, everybody's got a hook. Everybody is motivated by something, whether it's, you can't drive the car, because we want you to be safe, and this behavior demonstrates to me that you're not being safe. So maybe they don't have access to the car. Maybe they have to do things around chores. Maybe they have to do, maybe they lose phone privileges. Maybe they have to come home for a while or something like that. So you can, there's just needs to be some kind of a consequence. And then if you found out, like, hey, this has been going on a long time or whatever, then maybe you do need professional help. Maybe because it's like, one of the things is that I agree with you, Denisha. You don't want to jump to, oh my gosh, we did this. Let's take them for an evaluation. Although there really is nothing wrong with that. The whole idea of it is to provide some kind of moment where it's like, this is serious and we're going to address it. And like I said, sometimes it can be consequences, and sometimes it can also need to be professional help. So I think the key is really gathering information and then making the determination what is the best, course of action.
Yeah, I agree with Todd that, there's nothing wrong with taking them for an evaluation, because an evaluation is not a commitment to go into treatment. And people who specialize in substance use they really are kind of uniquely positioned to identify if this is something that really warrants a step forward into treatment, or if this might be something that you can address at home through accountability, through open conversation, through education. I'm sure Todd can agree, and Denisha, I'm sure you can as well, that having done many of these types of evaluations, there are a lot of times where we talk to parents and say, look, there really isn't a lot of evidence that this has kind of become this problem in their life. It certainly could if they continue and help provide resources and some education and maybe just modifying some things with support and accountability and structure. But our goal is certainly not to enter everyone who comes through our door into treatment. We really want to provide that kind of like Todd said, information gathering and kind of like just figuring out what's going on. So just like if you were suspecting or concerned that your child could have a seizure disorder, or if you were concerned that your child could have a thyroid issue, you would take them to a doctor for an evaluation to really kind of tease that out. And I think we can look at mental health and substance use from that same lens. As the parent, you don't have to have those answers. Going to a professional could be a really great resource and a great step for kind of getting a little bit more clarity about what might really be going on and what you can do moving forward.
So I'll throw a curveball because I warned you guys, that's what I like to do. So what if I've got the kid that won't talk? I can't sit him down and have the conversation of, I suspect that you're using drugs or you're drinking or you're vaping. He comes in, he's slamming the door. There is no conversation. What do I do?
Those are my favorites. I think any person who specializes in substance use will tell you that is the majority of the teens that they work with. And so I would go right back to what I said before, which is take them to somebody who does this a lot. Take them to somebody who really specializes in working with teens, because there are some kind of tricks that we have up our sleeve because we spend a lot of time talking to people who don't want to talk to us. And we can help you have that conversation, maybe even give you some tips, and maybe just get that conversation started. Sometimes it's a matter of getting that ball rolling so that you as a parent can kind of keep it going and maintain that. But my challenge would be, sure, if you don't want to tell me, that's okay. We're going to go talk to somebody you can have a confidential conversation with who will kind of help you figure some of this out and give me some recommendations as the parent. It's okay. I can't make you talk. I won't make you talk. We can go to somebody else, and who knows, even just saying, sure, let's go talk to this person instead might open up the gates a little, a little bit. But yeah, I think that's to be expected. And honestly, I think it's really understandable from the lens of a teenager. They really don't believe that adults can handle these kinds of conversations. And sometimes we reinforce that belief by getting really worked up and getting really upset, angry, scared, sad when we find out that they might be using. And that reinforces that idea that we're not safe to tell. Sometimes the best intervention is somebody who will just look very straight-faced at a kid and be totally unsurprised by what they're telling them.
Yeah, it's one of those things that if, once they get into the office, it's like, how come you think your parents brought you here? What do you think is going on? And then that just starts the whole process. It's like, I agree with, what Fiona was saying. It's like, if they don't want to talk to you, take them to a professional. And again, everybody has something that motivates them. So figuring out what that is to get them in the door, to have the conversation with the professional, that's all you got to do.
So what if my child has been struggling with depression or anxiety or ADHD? We've tried a bunch of medications. We do have this conversation and they say to me, like, this is part of how they're managing. Like, when I smoke, I'm not as anxious. I'm not as depressed. I'm more social. I'm more all these buzzwords that we like to hear as parents because we want our kids to have fun. Response.
You said they're taking medications?
Their medications aren't necessarily helping as much as they'd like. So they're using drugs in order to self-medicate and be the person that they'd like to be.
Well, there's other factors too. It's like, substances produce a lot of different, like dopamine in the system. So basically, all the drugs that people take fire in the mesolimbic dopamine system, and they're getting something else that's secondary. It's not just the, of course they feel better because they're getting large amounts of dopamine, which isn't natural. That's not, we get a natural high, if you would say, from, doing pleasurable activities, eating our favorite food. That's kind of the hanging out with our friends, all that kind of stuff is natural. And so if a person is like, well, it's not this drug, it's like, I'm using this for that. It's like, there's a secondary gain that's coming from that. So it's not just the fact that they're saying these medications aren't working. It's like, well, probably because you're getting this dopamine rush that you don't get from taking your antidepressants and whatever. And so what needs to happen is they need to stop using substances so that they can have normal, dopamine levels and learn how to function at a normal level. And it's difficult, but that's kind of life. Like, that the whole thing about substances is that it creates this artificial experience that's just not natural. And kids are very prone to those kind of risky behaviors and whatever. And so then they get into this cycle. And so again, just to reiterate, while the kid is saying that, well, these meds aren't working and whatever, it's like, yeah, because again, there's a secondary gain.
I also like to say it's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm. So we're dealing with the symptoms that are coming with the medication not working or the depression or anxiety, but we're really not dealing with the underlying issue. And so focusing on how we deal with that underlying issue rather than masking it with drugs is often a conversation I have.
Yeah.
Well, there's also I'm sorry, Fiona.
It's okay. I'll let you finish because I'm going to get real worked up. So go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say what's interesting, if we go back to the beginning, so it's like the person started using or they had a mental health issue. So they had depression, anxiety, ADHD or whatever. So then they started to use because it's a short-term solution. I want to feel better. I want to try to medicate through these symptoms. And then what happens is the solution to the problem actually makes things worse. And then they actually experience more depression and more anxiety due to the fact that either they're continuing to use the substances, which is creating a lot of anxiety, but they also have a loss of interest in activities and whatever, because the depletion of the dopamine is creating like anhedonia. They're not motivated. They don't want to engage in anything. They don't get any pleasure from activities. So then what happens is I got to use more of this substance in order to feel better. And it's just kind of the circular, relationship of basically trying to use this solution that causes a lot more problems.
Absolutely. And that's actually part of what I was going to say. I'm on a personal crusade to get rid of the phrase self-medicating, because it is such a lie that our kids buy into just because that phrase exists. Our kids latch onto this idea that it is even possible to medicate away our mental health challenges, or even not just mental health challenges, to medicate away my, not knowing what to do in a social situation, when the only way we ever build that skill is by kind of trial and error and practicing and allowing our brain to form those connections for how to manage in those situations, right? And so we're doing something that's kind of putting our brain on pause, stopping our brain from learning the actual skills that we need in order to function better. Because a lot of these mental health conditions are very treatable through resiliency skill building, through therapy, and through appropriate medication. And we would never take a medication for anything else that immediately makes the problem worse. We would never take a medication for, a thyroid condition that, 8 hours later makes our thyroid condition worse. And then we take it again and then it makes it worse. We would never do that with anything else. But there's sort of this perpetuated idea of substance use as a possible medication. And it's even more dramatic for our teens because their brains are so, they're so malleable, they're so changeable because of how young they are and the fact that they're still developing, that this process that Todd was describing happens so much faster for them than it does for us. And so we see this kind of real quick escalation of symptoms of depression, of suicidal thoughts and behavior, anxiety. And sometimes we see that happen not because they had that problem to start with, but because after a period of using, as Todd was saying, the dopamine depletion in their brain is really altering the way that they experience the world. And so we often see kids who didn't have a mental health condition who start using, and then because of whether it's marijuana use, whether it's nicotine use, alcohol use, whatever it may be, now they've developed a mental health condition and then start that process of thinking that this is the thing that's going to help them. So it's real risky for, it's really important that we educate kids about this interaction between substance use and mental health. It's not such a straight line as, hey, I feel bad and now I'm using and now I'm addicted. It really is this kind of like complex knot that kids get themselves caught in. And that's why having specialists are really important when it comes to substance use, because, we really are able to kind of help kids understand how that knot is tied sort of uniquely for them and what that looks like. So I think that's kind of the most important thing for us to talk about when it comes to mental health is substance use, because it is so prevalent for people who are struggling.
Are there any consequences to teenagers that seek substance abuse treatment in their teen years? Like, does it impact them with getting into college or future jobs or anything like that?
No, but legal charges can. So it's kind of one of the things that, again, treatment isn't impacting them. And in fact, if you go into treatment and want to continue services, at the university, they have, services on campus for college students. So I think that there's no consequences for taking care of yourself, but there are if you get legal problems. So.
Right. And the same applies in the school setting as well. Reaching out for those services in the school. I know that parents can be really apprehensive about not wanting their child to be sort of identified by school staff in that way. But that's part of why we have specialists in the school who are there to support these students who are able to provide confidential support that does not go on their record. Students are able to receive individual and group support in schools. It's not therapy, it's not treatment, but they are able to get some tailored support and education and consultation with parents as well that is not in any way tied to the educational record and is not shared with other staff in the school.
Those are great responses. Thank you, guys. Because I also run into clients that the parents are just really afraid of what this will do for their future. And I'm always like, there's no one tapping into our systems to say that your child is receiving mental health or substance abuse treatment. But I really like your response, Todd, of legal charges will follow you, your treatment. That doesn't go anywhere. I would like to talk a little bit about resources. So where do I go as a parent? I suspect that my child may be using substances. Where do I go? Who do I turn to?
Well, I mean, the first thing is if you decide that you want to, there's different ways of going. If you want to, like we were talking about, have an assessment, then you can go to your find out what your insurance benefits are that cover, usually it's behavioral health, and just kind of see what your benefits are and then who's in your network as far as private providers. If you are, for example, Loudoun County Mental Health specializes with individuals that are uninsured, have Medicaid or Medicare. And so we provide services for and assessments for individuals that meet that criteria. So that's kind of the first step if you decide that. There's self-help groups if you want to try those. There's substance or there's 12-step meetings that are for teens. There's Alateen. There's all kinds of different self-help groups if you want to try those too. And as Fiona is going to talk about, there's resources in the schools that you can start with. So there's a lot of different. I would say it's almost like different touching points to intervene.
Thank you for that segue, Todd, because yes, I was going to share that the school is a great first starting point because we do have some of those resources that are kind of right there already in the school that can help you get started, especially if you're not sure if it rises to the level of being ready to go get an evaluation or going to treatment. We can provide consultation as student assistant specialists in the school. So reaching out to your school, if you're in Loudoun County, every school cluster is assigned a student assistant specialist. So every school has that available to them to do consultation with you, to kind of help you walk through some of that, talk with your student, even do some screening with them to give you some recommendations and to give you a sense of kind of what they're able to learn. So it's a great starting point, and we do help parents walk through the process of getting into treatment if that's what they choose to do, or referring for self-help. There are some organizations in the area that might not appear on your insurance, but do specialize in providing substance use treatment that would provide out-of-network care. So we do have a lot of great resources in the schools. We're really lucky in Loudoun that they have kind of made that a priority to provide this specialization in the schools. Fairfax County, I don't know if anybody's joining us from Fairfax County, but they do have a similar role in their schools. I'm not sure how they're allocated, if they're assigned to every school necessarily, but they do have substance abuse prevention specialists there in Fairfax County. And I know Prince William has, I think, a few of them as well. But I'm not sure exactly what type of support they provide to students. So definitely starting with the school can be really valuable. I certainly understand the apprehension, but I can say in Loudoun County, it is a confidential service if you reach out to the student assistant specialist in the school. That information is kept confidential from other school staff.
I would also add primary care doctors or your pediatrician to that list. I've gotten a couple clients referred that way where it came up during an appointment or where parents felt more comfortable talking to the doctor rather than starting with the school. Fiona, can you tell us a little bit about your book, Read This and Call Me in the Morning? And is it good for parents even if their kids aren't using any substances?
Thank you. I would be happy to talk about that. Shameless self-promotion, I guess. So the book is really designed for parents who are trying to get ahead of this issue. I think it is really valuable. I actually started thinking about writing it years and years ago when I was working in treatment and wishing that I had something I could hand parents to just kind of get them caught up to speed on how all this affects the brain, how mental health and substance use affect one another, and how they can kind of provide some preventative steps at home, accountability, empathic connection, having these conversations. So my goal in writing it really was initially self-serving, to have something to hand to parents as a treatment provider, to kind of go along with that process. But the way that it's designed is really for people who want to get ahead of this issue. How can we kind of be aware of what our child's risk factors may be? How can we mitigate those risk factors by boosting protective factors for them? It's a really quick read. So it's kind of like a pick it up and put it down maybe in a day, definitely over the course of a weekend. It's only like 150 pages and it's got cartoons in it, which is a little bit different, just to kind of, again, we want to have these really open, empathic, and almost lighthearted conversations with our kids. So, why should we as parents read a 400-page diatribe on the depths of horrifying addiction? Those are really valuable. Those stories matter. But I wanted to provide something that was a little bit more of kind of a quick guide. And so I actually have one with me. It's, like I said, it's really little, it's very easy to read, and there's all kinds of horribly drawn cartoons by myself. And so I highly recommend it for people who maybe aren't even facing this issue yet, but want to make sure they're ahead of the game.
I love it. So 2 quick things. Val is going to put a survey in the chat, and if you can, please complete that survey. It does help us with funding and knowing what we can do better and how we improve our parent panels. And while you're doing that, I'm going to start with Todd. Do you have any last words for us or any words of wisdom for parents?
Wow. Okay. I would just say that, again, what we've talked about today is just realize that the most important thing is having conversations, being open with your kids. And it's like, the one thing I always ask parents is like, do you guys have dinner together? Like, do you guys have time where you sit down and, spend time together? And I think that's important, because establishing that communication is so important, because it's going to allow you then to have some kind of connection, so that when you need to have these kind of conversations, you have something established so you can do that. Also, we've talked a lot about the importance of mental health and substance abuse, and I think it's just important that if you realize something is going on, to just make sure that you get your kids the help that they need, and just continue to be open and available, and they'll come to you.
Fiona.
I'm lucky because I had a little bit of lead on this question. Thank you so much, Todd, for sharing that, because I absolutely agree with everything that you said. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that this can happen to anyone. There is no type of kid that this happens to. All of us kind of working in this field know that we have seen every kid come through our door because their brains are so vulnerable, and this is a brain health issue. Any kid with a brain can have this happen to them. And so it is, it's really valuable that you are all here. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're even willing to entertain this conversation is such a leg up, I think, in terms of being preventative and keeping your kids safe. But remembering that this is a health issue, and because it's a health issue, it can happen to anyone. And if we treat it as a health issue, I think we're going to see really big changes in our kids' understanding of why substance use is problematic. It's not problematic because people will be mad at you. It's problematic because it affects your health, and your brain is the most important asset that you have. So I think that's kind of my takeaway. This is a brain health issue, and we're all kind of in this together to protect our kids, and that's what it comes down to.
I would like to ask if anyone has any questions or anything they'd like to add to this conversation. Feel free to put it in the chat or to unmute yourself. We are happy to answer those questions. And I will say for you, Fiona and Todd, I appreciate you guys because this is such a huge conversation. Oh, Andrew, yes.
Yeah, hi. Just real quick, I'm the father of 2 daughters in Riverside and the grandparents here. We've been through a lot. They have custody of the children and we've been through a lot. So I don't want to talk too much. So I'll just let KC here answer or ask the question. So
he's a retired police of 33 years.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Question, couple questions, if it's okay, a quick follow-up statement. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for what all of you do. It's a very difficult job. I do take exception to the moral statement. I think it is a moral issue. Of course, that's a conversation for another day. What I'm finding, and it is a question, what do you all think about educating the parents more so that they know how to talk to their kids about these issues of the day, the fentanyl especially, which is coming across our border in truckloads? The reason I ask that is because when the kids come home and they ask us, what is fentanyl, and a parent doesn't know, I know, then I feel that the education of the parents is important. You all are suggesting we have conversations. I think that's great. But I don't think very many people know what the current situation is in the schools right now with the drug problem. I'm learning a lot just from what you all are saying. And secondly, how do you all identify? Can you identify? Do you identify? Or can we come up with something where, let's just say, for an example, a child is sitting alone at lunch, no one's sitting with them. A child is outside for gym, no one is, in other words, they're ostracized, they're by themselves. I think that based on what these girls have been telling us is that they feel that there's no avenue to go to. And I know they have counselors and so forth, but
They get busy.
everybody's busy, and I appreciate what they do. I think you have wonderful counselors there. But is there a system in place to, number one, help identify these potential at-risk children, number one? Then my former question was, what do you all think about educating the parents? And one last statement, my one granddaughter from Dare back in, I think, the 4th or 5th grade, that had such an impact on her that she preaches to us about not using abusive substances and so forth. So I don't know that what your affiliation with the law enforcement community is in the high schools, but I can tell you that there's a lot of police officers out here that would volunteer their time, including me, to come to assemblies and so forth. And if it can impact one child, then that's better than no children. And that's what I'd like to ask and say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I jump in real quick? So Matt, I don't know if you are in a capacity to speak about the relationship that the foundation has with LCSO, but I agree with you. I'm going to say, Mr. Taylor, that our relationship with LCSO and with the SROs that are on the campuses at the schools is really important. We go through a process of training all of those SROs in something called Sources of Strength, which is a program that LCPS uses as a tier 1 program to ensure that there is a culture of change at the schools that really focuses on the positivity and creates community in that school. And that program originated from a program that was started at Woodgrove High School by our founder and chair, who did lose her son to suicide. So I fully hear what you're saying and believe that that is a great relationship to have. And I'm very proud of what we do with LCSO. And then I know that Fiona, I'm going to let you take the second question about fentanyl, because I know that I have been invited to several, as a parent, forums that LCPS has had with LCSO on fentanyl, because it is a very scary situation. It is a one and done situation where kids can take it for the very first time and can die. So I'll let you kind of answer that question about some of the programs that LCPS has had regarding this epidemic of fentanyl.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Val. Yeah, I reiterate what you said about, we have, I think, just finished a round of doing a variety of different, kind of reaching different parts of the county, doing some of those panels. We didn't have them at every school, but every region had at least one of those fentanyl awareness panels. Yesterday was National Fentanyl Awareness Day, Tuesday was National Fentanyl Awareness Day, today's Thursday. And so we did have some, some kind of campaigns going on in the schools to raise some awareness about National Fentanyl Awareness Day. And our student assistant specialists did send out a newsletter that went out to all LCPS secondary parents about National Fentanyl Awareness Day with some resources for further education for parents. Our student assistant specialists put out a newsletter. It goes out about every 6 weeks that goes out to parents, just kind of in terms of answering the question about educating parents. We also hold parent education events throughout the year. Unfortunately, those are not well attended. And so I think we've got to take some responsibility in terms of marketing those a little bit better, but we do hold in-person as well as virtual parent education events. We do hold parent coffees at the middle schools and at the high school level. Those go out usually through like counseling department emails to parents. And like I said, that newsletter goes out every 6 weeks or so, and it has a lot of different educational resources. Usually there's kind of a current events type of section of that newsletter where we address maybe something that's happening in the news and how parents can kind of talk to students about that. There's a discussion guide that is included in those newsletters that goes along with our presentations that we give to students, that gives some tips for parents about talking to their students about those presentations. So we do put out a lot of different resources, but I would really say that those kind of personal individual connections are really powerful, and making a connection with the student assistant specialist at your school. At Riverside, I believe that the student assistant specialist there is Kevin Grigsby, if I'm remembering that correctly. So reaching out and making a connection with them there, and if you want to offer to partner there and see if there's anything that you can help with at that school, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with you about that, maybe for next year. We do partner with our sheriff's deputies in the school, as well as the Leesburg Police Department in the schools that they're in. They're still running DARE. That's still a program that's going on. I think it goes, Mr. Bressler, I think it goes until finishes in 6th grade. Is that right?
That's right. They have, we have an elementary school in 5th, and we do 6th grade there in the middle school. And,
Right.
and Mr. Taylor, as you're probably aware, we have SROs in all middle and high schools as well. As Fiona pointed out, we do a lot of collaborative programs. We have presentations. Most recently, I recall there was one, it was held at Blue Ridge Middle School, I believe. That was a drug oriented. But again, as Fiona also pointed out, these are often not well attended. We had another one for traffic safety that unfortunately had to get canceled just due to low enrollment. But so much of this goes out on social media. I think it's Connect Ed as well. The schools put out a lot. If you have an opportunity to, if you're not a social media person, you might miss some of these things, but the schools do send out emails. So definitely connect in with that and the administration as they pump out their marketing material as well. Because I'll say this, as we have partnered with the Ryan Bartell Foundation and the schools through student assistance services, there's a lot going on. There really is. I've always been impressed with what I became familiar with student assistance services maybe 5-6 years ago when Jen Evans was closer to the actual presentations, but they work diligently nonstop to deliver these messages about all these different problems, vaping, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, things like that. The last thing I wanted to mention, Mr. Taylor, you had asked about high schools. I know there's a conversation ongoing right now, and Fiona, you may be aware of Jen Evans is talking, or some conversation about doing something additional in the high schools for the next school year. You're a little premature, but I will say that since you brought it up, Mr. Taylor, that yeah, it's recognized as an opportunity to present some more material. It won't be as grandiose as a DARE. I don't know what it'll look like, but there is ongoing conversation about more collaborative work between the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office and LCPS through the Student Assistance Services.
Well, we'd like to be involved in that, and if I can help former law enforcement, I would love to get involved in it. So if that becomes available and you all can put it out on social media, I will be the first one to attend.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For your questions and comments. Todd, Fiona, I do want to address Erica's question in the chat. I feel like we tapped on it a little bit earlier, but just how to have that conversation about with a child that is saying, I'm going to use these substances one day.
I think that's, I would really encourage, thank you so much for sharing that with me. That's a really brave thing to share. And I think there is a way for us to be clear with our kids about the way that we will hold them accountable if they make that choice, without saying, without kind of saying that the relationship will be destroyed in the process, right? We can say, like, that's not acceptable in our house. Here are the rules. That ability to predict what the outcome is going to be, what the consequences will be, what the response will be is really valuable. It doesn't mean they're not going to tell you things in the future. You can be clear, you can hold them accountable, and you can still be empathic and have healthy conversation, right? Healthy conversation doesn't mean the person likes what you're saying. So you can tell them, here's why this is unhealthy for you. Here's why the expectation is that you don't do this. Here's what can happen to your brain. And you can go through and again, maybe not all in the context of one individual conversation. It's okay to have multiple of these conversations over time. But to say, if you make that choice, here's what's going to happen. Here's what the consequence in this house will be. And that can really help them making that decision in the future to know, well, if I do this, my parent's going to do X, Y, and Z, right? So I would encourage you to share what your response will be in that event. And you can do that without yelling and without showing that you're upset, but just being really clear, like, okay, my job is to keep you safe. And if you're doing things that are unsafe, that are unhealthy, there's going to be a response, and here's what it will be.
I think also the fact that, like, I agree with you, the fact that the person is disclosing that, like, she's like, well, I'm going to do this. The fact that you have that kind of communication that she could say that, I think is great. The other thing is that if she's like, I'm going to do this, the longer you can prevent somebody from initially using substances, the better. One of the strongest predictors of addiction and long-term drug use is early initial use. So the longer you can push that down, the better. So if it's like, I'm going to use when I'm 21 or whatever, it's like, well, that's a long ways away. Or I'm going to use when I'm 18. It's like, well, that's ways away. But the longer you can push it down the road, the better.
Thank you, guys. And I do think, as a person that has lived and worked in Loudoun County for a very long time, I think we all agree that the parent education is so important, but there's so many resources and no one knows how to find them. So I completely can sympathize and empathize with the Taylors about what you said, because there are a lot. Please go to your schools, have those questions. Loudoun County Mental Health, I worked there for a very long time with Todd. So there are a wealth of information, and they can also point you in the right direction, even if that's not, your landing ground. So thank you all. I'm going to turn things over to Val.
Well, thank you, Denisha. Fiona, Todd, really appreciate your time. Great panel, great discussion, lots of really valuable information. We will be sending out an email to everybody who registered with lots of resources that Fiona and Todd have shared with me and Denisha has shared with me, so that you'll have those in an email form. I'm going to just put our website in the chat. You can check out kind of our future programs, both for parents and for teens. If any of those fit kind of what your needs are, please feel free to register. You can also reach out to me. I'm happy to give you some more detailed information on the programs that we provide. So, and for any of you golfers out there, we are having our 3rd annual golf tournament on June 8th at Loudoun Golf and Country Club. So that information is on our website too. We are a nonprofit, and that's one of our 2 fundraisers that we do every year. So if you'd like to play golf, please join us on June 8th. So thank you again. We wish you a good evening, and we will see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.